So the aims for the session, as for all of our network meetings, our session will give you an opportunity to talk in small groups. We will use the breakout room. I know some people find that difficult depending on the circumstances that they're joining, but it's such an integral part of the network, and evaluations always show that people value that time to be able to chat together. So that is a big part of our network meeting today. But also you'll be able to reflect on presentations. We have two schools represented this afternoon. A third have sent some slides but are unable to attend due to the inevitable illnesses in school at the moment. But through those sharings, you'll have an opportunity to reflect on those with regards to your own practice in school, I hope. And our focus for this afternoon, having spent our last network meeting thinking about aspects of reading, we've returned to writing today, and our practice sharing comes first of all from St Joseph's RC Primary in Blaenau Gwent. I'm extremely grateful to the deputy head, the year 5-6 teacher, Anne-Marie, who will be sharing a little bit of a relatively new approach to the teaching of spelling. And similarly, on that theme of spelling, always asked for in the evaluations, I'll share a couple of slides that have been shared from Glasluck about some of their approach to spelling, and remind you of some professional learning resources that remain available to you. Later in the session, I'm really delighted that the deputy head teacher at Ringland Primary in Newport, Dawn, will be joining us to give us a flavour of some practice sharing that the school will be offering later this term, looking at the developing work of the school to enhance that writing journey for their pupils. That's a fabulous presentation, so I'm sure you will enjoy that. Towards the end of our meeting, I'll share some resources and a reminder of the professional learning offer. And can I remind you that as we go through this afternoon, often when I'm working in schools or I receive emails from teachers looking for advice about what's going on in other schools with this, or what are you seeing in other schools for that? Please can I remind you, this is a perfect opportunity to pop those kinds of questions in the chat, and people can respond to them as the meeting goes on, or I can pick them up as any other business. So, if you want to find out what scheme people are using for various things, or any resources that people are finding useful, please pop it in the chat and we can refer to that as we go along. So, without further ado, if you're just joining us, welcome, Croeso. Can I ask you to register your attendance using the link in the chat, please? So, for our first practice sharing this afternoon, I'm really delighted to invite Anne-Marie, Deputy Head Teacher at St Joseph's RC Primary in Blaenau Gwent, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the new approach to spelling in the school. Anne-Marie, are you there?
I am here. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you to you. Really, really grateful for your time this afternoon. And I know you haven't got long with us, so we'll make the most of you while you're here.
Say, if anybody does have any questions, to ask them either as we're going along or at the end, because I will be shooting off, and then I'll be leaving Nick online to listen to the rest of it. So as Catherine has already said, just for the rest of you, my name is Anne-Marie Burgess. I'm the Deputy Head and Year 5-6 teacher at St Joseph's Roman Catholic School in Tredegar. And I think I spoke a little bit too enthusiastically about the superhero spellings in my last meeting with Catherine, so that's why I've been asked to give this presentation today. So three things I'm going to talk about really is why we've introduced the superhero spelling, what we are doing with it, and the impact that it's had on our spellings so far. So if I look at the why first, like I said, I'm the Year 5-6 teacher. I'm still finding they come into me in Year 5-6, spelling is still poor. We have tried previous spelling schemes. We've worked with Nelson, we've worked with the no-nonsense spelling, but nothing really stuck, and we didn't feel that we were having any real success with it. So when we got rid of Read Write Inc back last summer, and we've taken on the new Monster Phonics scheme, superhero spelling kind of goes hand in hand with that. So we thought, right, we'll bite the bullet and we'll invest in that as well to try and improve our spellings. We started using GL assessment, the NGST spelling test back in September. So what we wanted to do then was, obviously with the superhero spelling, is to put things in place ready for the next spelling test to see improvement, because they're not just going to improve on their own. You know, we obviously need to put things in place to help them. So that's the why. So if we go on to the next slide, we can talk about the what. So like I've said, we've invested in the superhero spelling scheme that goes hand in hand with the Monster Phonics scheme. You do get lots of resources with it. So this is just the beginning of it. I don't know if you go back. There we go. So you get a termly overview for each term. And then each week then, as you can see there, you get weekly spelling lists. And they would go home for us, the way we do it. Those spelling lists go home every week, usually on a Thursday, so that they've got time over the weekend and during the week to practice before they have the spelling test on the following Thursday. So if we go to the next slide. So that just talks a little bit about how the scheme is set up, really. You can run it in 3 sessions, as you can read there on the left. Or you can run it as 2 sessions and make them a bit longer. How you kind of set it up is up to your school, really. But the way we've done it, we've put it into 3 sessions throughout the week. So lesson 1 is called a learn session. And you're given the PowerPoints, which have got superhero characters on, to introduce the concepts and the spelling rules. So that's the first lesson that we do on a Tuesday. Then the next slide, please. So then lesson 2 is called the build. So that involves activities like you see there. They're the ones that they give you. You've got crosswords, word searches, the look, say, cover, right, check. And these apply the spelling rules that you would have started in the previous lesson. What we tend to do is we add our other spelling strategies to that as well. We'll do, you know, you write with your gel pens, write with your left hand, write in your pyramids. So all the other little spelling games that you've got, really, you can use then in these sessions. That's the way that we run it. So we do that on the Wednesday, and then next slide is lesson 3, which is the show. This is where we do the spelling test, which features the dictation sentences to test and then confirm the learning, excuse me, from the previous 2 lessons. So the spelling test you've got there, what we do, we cut the top off so they don't actually have the spelling words there. And then I'll read the dictation sentences, and then they fill them in. You could possibly, for your lowers, if you wanted to, you could leave those words on there and then they can choose the correct word. I mean, how you run it is up to you, and it depends on your class, really. We do it as a very much low stakes affair. They mark each other's work. There's no, you know, there's no pressure on them to kind of be getting those high marks. I don't mark their work. And then at the end of the spelling test, when they've marked each other's works, it's just hands up. Oh, who's got 5 or below, who's got a 6, who's got a 7. It's that kind of friendly, low stakes atmosphere about it. So there's no pressure on them that they've got to be getting, you know, high scores every week. So if we go to the next slide. So to supplement those lessons then, what they've given you, if you see on the left-hand side, it's handwriting. There's a handwriting sheet. Now that one is printed, but I think there's a cursive version as well, depending on what your school does for your handwriting. So each child has got a handwriting book, and then these spellings form part of our guided reading carousel. So when I'm doing my guided reading session, you've got groups off then doing things related to the spellings as well. And one of them, as you can see there, is handwriting. They've got to fill that handwriting in based on that week's spellings. And also we use Spell Blast on Hub. So what I did last summer, I put the whole year's worth of spellings onto Spell Blast and named them Year 5, Term 1, Week 1, then Week 2. So they know exactly which spelling set they've got to go to for that particular week. So we've got lots of these things going on as well to enforce really those spellings. And Spell Blast on Hub they can access at home and practice there as well. It does take time and it does take effort to be cutting all those little bits out and sticking them in the books. But we did it at the end of last year with lots of TAs helping and on board with it. So that the pieces of writing on the left-hand side of each handwriting book, they're already cut out and stuck in kind of in advance, because there's nothing worse than going into class and thinking, oh, I've got that lesson to do now, and you haven't got all the bits together. So it's really important, I think, to be really organised with it and committed to it. We haven't missed one single week since we started the first week in September. So you know, unless you're committed and you make the effort to do it, it's not going to work. It does take a lot of time, but we are seeing an impact, which if I go on to my next slide, please. So if you look at the data there, it's quite self-explanatory. When we did the NGST test in September, if the national average is 100, my year 5s scored 83.5 in September, which when we did the test then at the beginning of January, or in January at some point, it had risen to 92.1, and same for year 6 from 90.5 to 95.8. So the data is suggesting that the spelling scheme that we're using is having an impact, which we're really, really pleased about. And obviously we will continue to monitor that as we go through. So that's it really. That's what we're doing for the superhero spelling. So if anybody's got any questions, I would be happy to answer them now before I have to shoot off.
So if anybody wants to put something in the chat, feel free, or if you would like to unmute and come on and ask Anne-Marie, I'm sure that's quick and easy. Can I ask Anne-Marie? And I think I know the answer, because I think you mentioned it when we met. Sorry, by the way. What do the pupils think of it?
They actually quite enjoy it. And if I forget to give this, because we give the spellings out on a Thursday, if I forget to give them out on a Thursday, they're quite irate with me and reminding me. So yeah, they do get a little bit fed up sometimes, like I said, of just the 3 activities that are given. But that's where then we supplement. And you know what it's like, oh, get your gel pens out, write backwards, write with your left hand, and you make it a bit more fun that way. But generally they respond really well to it. They like marking each other's work with their green pens. So no, it's been a really positive experience for us, to be honest. But you've got to put the time, the effort and the commitment in.
Yeah. I'll just give it a moment in case anybody wants to come and ask you any practicalities.
Sorry, can I just butt in? We had a launch day as well for Monster Phonics, so all the school dressed up, staff, children included. So when doing that, Anne-Marie's, you did superheroes, didn't you?
We all dressed up as superheroes.
Yeah, while launching Monster Phonics as the phonics scheme that we were using, they launched their superhero spelling, and you had kids dressed up as Superman, Wonder Woman, and it was lovely to see them do that too.
Thanks, Nicola. Nicola, slightly off screen there, the literacy lead in St Joseph's stuck in there.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, then Catherine, I'll speak to you soon, I'm sure.
Really grateful, Anne-Marie. Thanks so much.
All right, no problem.
Diolch. So a flavour of the beginning of a new scheme. I thought I've seen superhero spelling starting to crop up in a number of schools, and I know certainly Monster Phonics is a synthetic phonics scheme that is being used in a number of schools in our region to good impact. So to just focus in on that spelling, which, as I say, in evaluations from network meetings past, often it's coming up as can we still keep thinking about spelling. Last October 2024, our network meeting, then we had spelling on the agenda, and in a breakout room discussion across quite a number of teachers, I asked people to talk about what are the current challenges for the development of spelling in schools, and also, you know, what's going well as a mechanism for practice sharing. And I know that went down really well with teachers. The findings from that I've summarised on the screen here, and I think it is quite interesting because it's some of the reasons why Anne-Marie, Nicola in St Joseph's, and in many schools, that return to what are we doing for spelling is quite current. So, for example, a lot of teachers talked about, yeah, they do, even if they do okay in the spelling test, these are not being transferred. They're not able to, it's not showing up in their independent writing. They might remember for a week and then that is gone. That transference is just not happening. The difficulty in engaging perhaps learning at home to enhance what's going on in the classroom for many remains a struggle, and we can't rely on that being the main mechanism to develop children's spelling skills. So you can see on the screen there the challenges that teachers were speaking about in October 24, many of which I still hear. But what was going well on the next slide, teachers were saying, well, when it works well, it's because we are focusing on a pattern and we're explicitly teaching. We're using personal journals, personal have-a-go books, identifying personal spellings for pupils, either picking up from their marking or from self-reflection, and providing more personalised spellings for children. That those are being applied across the curriculum, that it's short, sharp activities regularly through the week and across the weeks. And so you can see also that the range of some of the spelling schemes that teachers at the time were saying were being used. For example, Nessie as an intervention, and Spelling Shed came up. Read Write Inc resources remain used really well in many schools. So this was sort of 18 months ago now, that when this was posed as a question, and it was about that time, coincidentally, that I ran a professional learning session as an online session. And when you have access to these slides after the meeting today, the links are live in the slides. So if spelling remains on your school agenda, if it's part of your development plan, if it's something that you think would be useful, please feel free to just have a look at the slides from the training that are there in the green box on the slide, or to view the recording and see if there are any aspects of it that would enhance your practice in school. The professional learning session itself is very much along the lines of those strands that teachers said were working well. And those are the things that Estin also say are what they see in schools where spelling is a high priority and is impactful. So being able to make sure that there is some explicit teaching that if children are being tested, it is, as Anne-Marie mentioned, low stakes, and it is the development of that visual memory and learning of the spelling patterns that is the key, as opposed to providing lists to take home for children and relying on them doing that out of school. So one of our schools in particular attended that training, Glasler Primary School. Kate, who is unable to be with us this afternoon, but had prepared some slides to speak to, she came on the training and then provided some guidance material, if you like, for staff in her own school, which built on the key messages from that training, which reflects as well the spelling in our curriculum. So being able to focus on teaching through school, first and foremost, phonics strategies for spelling, that remains the key for most spellings in the English language. That understanding of being able to take a word, to segment it into its individual phonemes, and then being able to recognise which graphemes represent those phonemes. So phonological strategies remains the key spelling strategy right through the primary phase. But as we mentioned in the training, she also is suggesting to staff about the importance of using morphological strategies and etymological strategies, or in terms of morphological strategies, simply drawing children's attention to and having a consciousness about prefixes on words, the spelling of those, and how that impacts not only on the spelling of the word, but on the meaning of the word. Suffixes in the same way. And then in terms of etymology, thinking about the root of the word, how that's spelt, and where it makes sense, just exploring a little bit where that came from in terms of language, and whether that helps to understand the spelling pattern, but also the meaning of the word, and engaging meaning and spelling, how impactful that is for children. She also stressed the, in particular, orthographical strategies, which the curriculum tells us is essential for thinking about particular spelling rules, but also the visual nature of spelling and how to support children learning that sequence of letters to support that visual memory. So from the training, Kate provided some guidance materials using the resources from the training, and also putting together some guidance as an expectation for staff around how those spelling lessons fit into a week in school, how home learning relates to it, how to for teachers to provide additional time to practice, which again Anne-Marie just mentioned, in terms of using perhaps guided reading time, using other time during the week as that time for children to build that understanding of a particular learning intention. The guidance about the marking of spellings and how that impacts alongside this explicit teaching of spelling. So Kate would have spoken about this much better, obviously, but just a flavour of how that training was then used to provide some guidance for staff in school, and using a number of the resources that were shared there, even some home learning support tools to send home with the children. So bearing in mind in particular the session from Anne-Marie there, and particularly that learn, where we're explicitly teaching a spelling pattern, build, where we're providing children with opportunities to practice those spellings, and then that show session, the low stakes, almost testing the progress of those spellings. Can I ask you, if I pop you all in some breakout rooms for 10 minutes or so? Okay, I think we're just about all back. I hope that was a useful time to spend together. I think something that I want to recommend to you with your Leeds hats on. Last July, the Department for Education in England produced some guidance for schools in England. They've done similarly before for reading, which is an excellent document. And if reading is on your school development plan, I highly recommend the reading framework from England, with some very good resources and advice for schools. The new writing framework was published in July, and whilst we are in a different situation in Wales, we have a different curriculum, and we have a much less stringent assessment process for schools. The document itself, I think, bears some reference if writing is on your school development plan, even if it's just another source of information for you. So on the slide, the link to the resources at the bottom of the slide, so that when you get these, you can have immediate access. You can see the sections that are involved in the document, and as always, the appendices are particularly useful. One of the appendix there makes reference in particular to morphemes and teaching using morphemes, so teaching explicitly prefixes, suffixes for plurals, and a variety of purposes for suffixes, and how that supports spelling as well as deep understanding of vocabulary. So I recommend the resource as another reference point to you. And with a particular mind to spelling, section 3 reflects handwriting and spelling as two of those key transcription skills. And at the end of the section is a little audit with some suggestions for, as leaders, the types of prompts that you might reflect on, thinking about your current processes in schools around spelling. So it may well be a reference point for you if it's something that is on your radar in school. And finally, thinking about spelling, just to remind you that there is another school sharing professional learning that is available online to view the slides, and that was shared by Glant Usk just over a year ago, and that's available with the link on the screen. And so it's at this point I'd like to welcome our colleague from Ringland Primary School in Newport, Dawn. She is the deputy head, the literacy lead, and a guru for all things teaching around literature. Dawn, are you there?
Here, I'm so sorry. Mr. Pruitt and I were just having a little sneaky chat. He popped in to see me. I've got to say, I feel very ethereal. I think that's the correct word here, with all this light shining through. First time in my life. But just to say hi to everybody. It's been such a long time, hasn't it, Catherine? And I just want to say thank you, a huge thank you for allowing Ringland here, me, to share our writing journey in school. It's a bit of a big reboot for us. I've been here 14 years, 10 of those years I've been the deputy head, and it's been an absolute privilege to watch the writers come and go in our school. And we found that we had a wonderful SIP day about 14 months ago, and we kind of knew, Mr. Pruitt and myself, that we needed a little reboot with our writing journey, and we've got some great practice here. And this is our journey basically to where we are at the moment. The vision is there. We strive to nurture our Ringland writers to be confident, creative and fluent communicators. And actually the communication should come first with this, because oracy is a huge part of this journey. And we've committed to provide our children with exciting, purposeful and inspiring reasons to write. I won't read the rest, you can all read that, but we'll go to, are you going to do the slides, or am I taking control?
I've given you, have a
brilliant.
presenter role now, if you've got the option there to take control.
Okay, bear with. Can everybody see that slide, the next slide? Perfect.
Yes,
okay, so brilliant, thank you. So I'm just going to share a brief context to our school. Lots of you know Ringland. If you don't, this is just a little outline of who we are. We are in a high area of deprivation, and we've got about 225 pupils on roll, including 23 of those pupils who attend the nursery on a part-time basis. We currently have 8 classes from reception to year 6. And we have approximately 49% of free school meals, free school learners. And this is well above the national average of 25%. We've got 2 local authority resource-based classes at school and the 3 nurture classes in progressional step 1, progressional step 2 and progression step 3 for our most vulnerable learners. We identify around about 48.5% of our pupils as having ALN. And we recognise that that figure is well above the national average of 11.2. We only have a small percentage of children, around 6%, having English as an additional language. And we have an average ACEs data is, well, it suggests to us that there's 38% of pupils that we know have 1 or more ACEs. So our school is a challenge, and I know that many other schools are in the same position that we are. So whenever we change anything in school, it's got to be obviously for the best interest of our children. We had the last inspection in 2020. So with the current inspection processes and dates and diary, we're not sure where we sit. but we're ready if that happens. Okay, so our development points for literacy. Like I said, we had a SIP day with our school improvement partner about 14 months ago, and we looked at books across the school. We had a whole day of listening to learners, and it became clear to us that as a school we needed a more consistent approach to our writing offer. And we know that whenever that we introduce something, we have that introducing, we have that tweaking, and we have the embedding. So I'm pleased to say we're at the tweaking stage at the moment. But what we wanted to do as part of that is to consider reviewing the text used in our school to ensure the most appropriate hook and balance of fiction and non-fiction were being carefully planned for across the school. So what we found, in some cases we had more narrative, in some cases we had very little non-fiction, and that was a big part of our school development to kind of get that right and get that balance in every class. We wanted to provide staff in response to this to ensure that there was a consistent and progressive build up to writing across the school. We considered revisiting the language of learning and looking at revising it to enable pupils to be able to better talk about their work as well. Because what we did find was when we were looking at our children's targets, the majority of children were saying to us, oh, my handwriting has improved. And yes, that's really, really important. But for us, we wanted to be hearing that their targets were more about the language that they've used and the impact of that language in their writing for the reader, and really instilling the fact that our pupils, when they write, you are the author, you are going to be better than the author, you are now in control of your own writing. And that process has really, really worked well for us. And obviously it was for myself as the deputy head to share that best practice across school. So we only had two aims. We kept it really, really tight with what we were doing in terms of when we have change that could cause a little bit of anxiety for teachers. So we wanted to redefine and develop our writing pedagogy, our offer across all phases. All teachers were involved in this. It was a classic of we're going to do this with you, not to you. And we wanted to ensure that there was a consistent whole school approach and progressive approach in planning a sequence of extended writing. And that then became our target on our school improvement plan. So about 14 months ago, we had inset in September, and we began to think about, as leaders, because we're all leading our learning, you know, what are we doing? What is our offer? Why are we changing it? And what will be the impact? And we started to formulate what literacy looked like, and we used the good old blob tree, and many staff felt they were a 15, many felt they were a 12, and it was a really open and honest professional diagram. And when we look at this, it's huge. Literacy is so huge. We're talking about grammar, modelling, writing, your oracy, you're reviewing it. How can the children redraft and make it better? What does that look like if you're an NQT coming in, and we've got 2 NQTs this year? We're thinking about sentence level work, always a confusion, punctuation, how does that look like in context? What are our writing scaffolds? You know, what do they look like for our younger children? What do they look like as we progress through the school? And we know that with any change, could cause anxiety amongst our staff. But like I said, what we focused on was a whole school approach with every voice being part of that. So we wanted to explore, and you'll see I've underlined the words, the consistency. And we use those 2 words and a commitment here. We don't use about those non-negotiables. We just say we're going to be committed to doing this. So we wanted to explore how we can support those learners to create a piece of writing across the school. What does that look like for our younger learners? What does that look like for our Year 6 learners? Do we have a consistent approach in our steps to planning? How progressive does that look when you're lining up your books and you're looking at nursery, which was what I did last week, to Year 1, to Year 3, to Year 5? What does that journey look like? And thankfully, it was a very warm feeling that we had last week when we did that, and it's looking really, really good here. And then how do we choose the literature as a stimulus. And this is a huge part of maybe rebooting our books and looking at our existing offer. What does it look like in year 6? What are the books that are working? What are the books that maybe we need to redefine those? Because our learners, we just had a lovely dialogue in our little breakout group. We were saying that, you know, learners are changing, and that is so true. So our books also need to change along with that. So we didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to keep our old but golden parts. And this was part of our literacy work that we did a few years ago. And we just wanted to segment what oracy looks like, what our reading would look like, and what our writing would look like. And these are all the wonderful things that I know that majority of you are using. This is nothing new, especially P4C, Talk for Writing, your D for LC, which is that drama for learning and creativity, your scaffolds, you know, the I see, I think, I wonder. So we wanted to make sure that all these wonderful things that we've got are being used to the best possible way. And this is part of our reading as well. This is our mat for reading. We have big read characters, and they are on a mission, those 4 characters, and they help the children identify what that writing looks like and what the reading is happening within that writing or as an author. So moving forward, this is what our I say the journey looks like. Now, this is very, very flexible. This is not about on day 1, we need you to do this. We formulated this into what our steps for success should look like. And what we didn't want is we didn't want this to be a straitjacket. We wanted it to be really, really flexible. And as part of our discussions, we felt that the new staff or NQTs needed a format that was flexible. So we would expect to see a hook at the beginning of our writing journey. Now that can look very, very different in each class depending on those children and the cohort of children. And a big part of our school is also those oracy. So at the beginning, we would expect to see something that looks like that. They're 2 of our commitments, we would say then. And then as we go around, we have our reading, analysing the text. We'd like to see some work on that, some grammar and punctuation, maybe a reading response. Your word collection might be before that. What we didn't want is our staff to say, oh, I've done oracy, so I need to do some reading. Oh, and then I need to go into grammar and punctuation. This is a very, very flexible flow of our writing journey. But part of that, we felt that we needed to support staff in terms of some medium-term plans. And we never, ever have had anything kind of as structured in the school. But we felt as a school this was something that we could develop. And, you know, we've created these reading spines. And what they do in essence, it's a great way to monitor and track the literacy that's been developed in our school from nursery to year 6. Again, these are really, really flexible. They have the genre of the book. There's a little snippet of what the book's about, the synopsis. Then the staff will write possible learning opportunities. There will be oracy, discussional points, and then obviously there'll be a hook. And when we look at those hooks, they could be really, really different across the school. We tend to, in year 5, 6, think about that emotive hook. And it could be an envelope with pictures. If we think about clockwork, our children would not know what a hearth looks like. So we might have an envelope with a picture of a hearth, a German snowy town, a tower, a cloak. We might just have music for the children to walk into. Hugo Cabret, we play the music, the French Parisian music. We could have just pictures dotted around. We could have a moving image. I know that further down the school, we've had an actual 3D spaceship that landed on the school grounds. And then part of work last year for the Ironman, there were huge, big 3D parts of the body that were found outside, and the children, the awe and wonder was just incredible. We don't expect everybody to do that because that's a huge process. But as and where it really made the difference to those children's learning. And especially with the Ironman, they were a particularly difficult cohort of children, but their emotive buy-in and their the hook really got those children to think, and they went out bouncing out of the room talking about it wherever we walked in the school. Do you know we found an eye? And do you know we found a leg? And these children were really, really hooked straight away. So that's just an example of what that could look like. This is another one from year 4. We've got a recent book called The Hike, and I know as a cluster, we've been working alongside Helen, and we've been doing some work on book fairs, and this is one of the books that we've chosen to do in year 4, which is lovely, and that just gives you an idea of what they're going to be doing next. They've highlighted what they've done, even with one book, and I know in year 4 now they're thinking about the alternative ending. Just moving forward, just for some examples, we don't have short-term plans written up, because what we felt was we were writing short-term plans and then we were writing slides, and it's really not good use of our short amount of time that we do get. So all of our short-term are our slides that we develop and we share with our children. So this is an example of a year 6 example, and we're hoping that our children, as our hook, will contribute to our thoughts and ideas. That's their learning intention. We've used the literacy shed here, and being part of the Voice 21 school, we want our children to understand what parts of that voice that we will be looking at. So is it their social in this? Are they going to be working together in groups? Is it going to be something their physical language, the linguistic, and obviously here they'll be using the cognitive language as well. So that's just a little example of what that would look like, and then following those slides for our children. This would have been a hook in year 6 to get them thinking about Rose Blanche at the beginning of maybe just a wartime kind of theme. We are big on widgets in our school. We really are, because of our differentiation and the need of our pupils. So for us, differentiation is key. So we have changed our thinking around that, and our Oracy cards that we used to have, which I'll show you on the next slide, have changed slightly just to accommodate for those pupils that have got an additional learning need. I'll just move forward. So these are the types of questions that we would, or question cards that we would include in part of our Oracy. So moving on from our hook, the next lesson, we want our children, our vision is to be curious learners, to show that courage and compassion. So here we're asking our children, you know, we need you to be asking questions. What could this mean to you? And we've got those scaffolds to support the learning. And I think on the next slide, we've got some examples of what that would look like, right from year 2, right the way up through to year 6. So even looking at a front cover or 2 characters, and we're looking at questioning, I wonder. So further down the school, that would be their scaffold. Just, I'm wondering why this might be. I'm wondering why this might happen. Further then in year 4, we're using more of a template, and we've got the scaffold is I see, I think, and I wonder, which is actually a reading scaffold, but the children had the back of the book for a change, and then they began to think about, wow, what could this be? What could this mean? Using those metacognition. And then this is what it would look like in year 6. But this is really, really important, that it's not just a question, that the children are actually justifying why they've asked that question. And that just shows that clear progression right the way from year 2, right the way to year 6, and that expectation across the school. And we've got our aspirational learners, which would probably be our old MAT learners. And again, you can see there that they are seeing, thinking, wondering, but they are going to be connecting their learning with something that might be linked to that theme or another character. And that's worked out to be really, really a challenge for our children. But, you know, this is September work here, where our children are now. It looks very, very different. And that was probably one of our first books that we looked at in year 6. So just moving forward then, we have our reading responses. In Ringland, we do have our big read characters. It's something that we've kept hold of, that we probably introduced 15 years ago as a school. And these 4 characters have reading missions. And we have Rex, who's the dog. He retrieves the literal information, dip into the text, find the answer. We have Exby, who's going to explore the language that the author uses. And we are really encouraging our children. We say across the school, how does the author, how do we know how that character feels? We're constantly talking about the author's use of language and the effect of it. We've got Dude, which is a higher order skill, and he looks at those inferential skills, which would be further up the school and with those layers of meaning. And then finally, Anza, who's very neat, very tidy. She likes to analyse and she likes to look at how non-fiction texts are put together. She blows them apart and she puts them back together. And it's given our children a really good understanding of how non-fiction works. So this is Rex, there's a picture of him. Sounds a little bit how I feel there. And this is an example of some of the reading responses that we will get from year 2. So the children will write in response to a letter, which is a wonderful example. And then the children are responding to the text that they're reading. In year 4, we've got the good old top 10 reading responses. We've got a PQE, so they're looking at the point, we're making a point, the children are going to find the quote, and then they're explaining what that could look like. Again, higher order reading, finding it quite difficult last year, but we're really pulling this together now in year 5. And then another example from the book, The Hike, is looking at a non-fiction piece of work, and it's an instructional piece of writing. It's how to get ready to go on a hike, and the children were using a little success criteria, which was a great scaffold for the children. Then further up the school, we've got children responding to a small snippet of information from the story. But what this is about is not just about the content or the writing that we've got from Rose Blanche. What we're seeing here is an idea of how we can get a response to reading through using true and false statements. Then thinking about, actually, we're looking at the words that are used to describe what people are doing a little bit more in depth. Who are the soldiers going to fight for? Find and copy the word that describes the mayor's speech. So we're looking at those words, those Rexes, finding and copying within a small segment of the story. And as you can see, as we go on, we're beginning to infer meaning. How does the author describe the mayor? So we're bringing in the author's use of language as well. And then finally, for our aspirational learners, you can see that the questioning there, why do you think Rose Blanche shivered with excitement? And in contrast to her mother, she felt cold. So you can see that real progression with even 1 year group, we can see just through those questioning, we're beginning to use those inferences in reading. Word collection is key. I know that we were talking about spellings and language in our little dropout group, but for us, our children's language is very underdeveloped. They're coming in with a lower point, and vocabulary is so key for us. So, this commitment to having word collection, I've just been teaching that this morning, actually. We want our children to know how words work. We want them to identify in a text that these are adverbs and how they work, and how do the adverbs work with those verbs, and what, going straight back to a noun. Oh, what's a noun? And even in year 6, it's that repetition of how these words work together, which is so key. And again, going back to those rich texts. So this is a little example from year 2 where they've had a word collection in their literacy. In year 4, they were looking at imperative verbs, using them with a noun and why as part of that. So they're exploring why they work together. And that will then be used in their writing. And then in year 6, we were looking here at different words, at those synonyms for words, but then you'll see the content compared to year 4. We've got that as a piece of work to where we are in year 6, where they've collected those words and they've actually used those words into a really short piece of writing that just shows that they've understood how those words are working. There's another example here, collecting the feelings of a character. I know we use lots of roll on the wall, but in this time we wanted our aspirational learners to actually compare the soldiers and the character of Rose, and they were collecting words for them. And you can see, you know, we've talked about the word of that compassion of the soldiers that this one pupil has thought about. I know I'm whistling through this very quickly. We've left lots out of those jigsaws, but I just wanted to finally think about the writing plans. As we all do really, really well, we want to try and differentiate even the writing plans for our children. And I think the children here were just focusing in on the picture, the very first picture of this story, and how we can plan that. Who's in the picture? Who are the other characters? Why are they there? So that we could then formulate the children's writing. We don't just have it on the screen. The children are expected to put it in their book and add the meat to the bone to that. When does this take place? It's a very, very small sketch in year 6. And then another plan that you might see is something like the German town, Rose, soldiers, flags, people. And then I've actually used some of their language and I've put it into their book. And then, of course, they've then used that to describe parts of that. So if they're describing the German town, that will be one paragraph. If they're writing about Rose, we're expecting them to use that language, and the soldiers, the flags, and the people. So finally, just the last part that I just want to flick through very, very quickly, and this has been a huge part of our whole learning journey, is the editing and the reviewing. Now, I know that this is quite contentious in many schools because you know, it's down to what we see as right for our children. And part of our journey from our school improvement advisory visit was to think about, how do our children edit their work? How do they redraft it? And how can we see that? And also, what do the other children think about their work as well? So we use something called a peer marking carousel. We have our success criteria. And this has been a huge part, and also not just of the journey, but for our children's motivation, for their self-esteem. They really look forward to having that teacher voice in this session, where they go around and they will use post-it notes. They are brilliant, and they'll have a success criteria. They will have a slide to follow that we have, which is their sentence stems to use. It's not just fab, this is great. They have to refer to a success criteria and actually forensically read the work and pinpoint great parts to this writing. But also, they can give that comment where, oh, actually, I love this adverb or the adverbial phrase, but next time you may be able to do this. And we want this to be caught. Sorry, we don't want it to be caught. We want it to be taught, not caught. And it is a big part of our final process. And this is just a little bit of an example of the modelling the expectation, using those post-it notes and sharing how this will be written as a proper, you know, lesson, not just 10 minutes at the end of it. It becomes part of our whole session and part of our whole writing journey. And I know I've rushed very quickly because I'm aware of the time, but Catherine, that's just a little snapshot of where we are at Ringland.
Diolch yn fawr, Dawn. I'm just going to invite, if anybody has any questions or that they'd like to ask you about the process. Shortly, I'll provide a slide that gives the date and the details. If anybody would like to come and see that in person in school, you're offering an opportunity coming up, aren't you, Dawn? So I'll give the details of that so that you can spend some time talking to learners, talking to teachers. Exactly. But in the meantime, if anybody has a question that they'd like to come on, or a comment for Dawn, that would be fab.
All quiet on the Western Front.
Stunned into silence, Dawn. Okay, well, I tell you what, we've got the rest of the session. If anything comes up in the chat, I'll keep an eye on and mention. Obviously, thanks coming in here from a couple of people, which you would expect. So thank you so much, Dawn. Really appreciate your time this afternoon.
You're very welcome.
What I'm going to do now is I'm going to drop everybody back into a breakout room. Hi everyone, I think we're all back. And just before we move on, if there are any questions or comments that came up in your breakout rooms that you would like to come back and ask Dawn, I think she's still with us. So if anybody would like to pop on and ask, it would be a good time. Well done. There was an awful lot of love for you in the chat in the breakout rooms.
Must be my ethereal self, Catherine.
I think it's just everything about you, Dawn, frankly. So what we'll do is I'll move on to just alert people to how they can make the most of the opportunity to come into school to meet you and to look at the work that you've been working so hard on with your children. So the next few slides. Oh, do you stipulate oh, hang on, there was a question. Flew off my screen. Do you stipulate a time frame for a lead up to writing, Dawn?
What a great question. I love that. No, we don't. We are literally we're all about that kind of quality, not the quantity. So we don't actually put a time frame on it. Obviously, if you're still looking, depends on the year group, but if you're still looking at a book, a picture book 3 weeks later, you know, we'd be asking the question, you know, why? But it just all depends on how that writing journey develops with those children and the book that is being used. Further up the school, as we start to begin to use novels and that sort of material, we would expect probably about 3 weeks time frame to finish a piece of work. But obviously further down the school, depending on the text, you know, we're kind of briefly or roughly asking those staff to not try and spend too long on a picture book. But again, it just depends on where it goes, the journey with the children per se.
Thanks for that. Any other questions coming up in the chat? Do your texts link with your topics, Dawn?
Yes, they do. So, for instance, this term, we have people, values and cultures. It's a very, very loose kind of like top hat to our themes. And in the spring term, it's all about the imagination, the enterprise. So we look at texts that will link with that. So we're very much about Hugo Cabret. There's some wonderful books out there called I Wonder. Anything that stimulates the children to think about the wonderment of the world and how it's put together. That's what we look at in our theme, and then we find those rich texts in our literacy, and that's a brilliant question because that's something that we have been working on that I didn't actually mention. So our texts do really dovetail with our topic. And the other thing that I just wanted to add as well, obviously we're all doing this is not new practice, but in our theme books, what we did a couple of weeks ago, we looked at a previous theme book across the school, one per year group, and we did look at the writing, the reading, the oracy opportunities that are within our theme as well. So that's kind of like our next stage here to ensure that we've got that consistency. We've got 3 pieces of reading in topic, we've got maybe 3 pieces of oracy and 3 pieces of writing that justify that topic. So I forgot to say that earlier.
Diolch, Dawn. Any other questions coming through? Okay, I'll keep an eye on and return to if anything else comes up. So just the next few slides are just a reminder of other sharing events that are coming up from our schools over the next couple of months. So the first of those coming up in March, practice sharing from Maindee Primary will be talking about their practice with regards to interventions. And then we have the Journey to Writing at Ringland on the 24th of March. There are some spaces available. The link is on the slide to book on for that day with Dawn and the rest of her lovely team at the school. I wouldn't leave it too long because the numbers are limited, obviously, because that is about being in the school and looking around. So please sign up for that if you're interested in finding out more, which I know from the breakout rooms a lot of people are doing, so I expect that'll be full soon. We also have the Federation of Blenheim Road and Coed will be hosting the Developing Early Writers, targeting the early writing process and pre-writing in nursery and reception, and sharing their best practice, and that's on the 26th of March. And then in June, we have 2 sessions, one hosted at Glasgow Primary online, looking at that high quality writing in humanities, building on the work that Bridie has been doing and that we focused on in previous network meetings. So you can see what that's looking like in one of our schools. And finally, Blenheim Road and Coed, the Federation, will be sharing their approach to spelling and what it's looking like in their school. And that's an online session as well. All of our online sessions will then be made available through the Teamspace so that you can access them on demand at any time. So I will keep you posted about that information. Previous professional learning that is available online to view, and the live links are on the slides here. Just earlier this week at Coed, they shared their whole school approach to reading, so you can look at the slides and view that recording through this slide here. Last year, we had a phonics programme briefing where 4 schools in our region talked about their view on their phonics schemes. Read Write Inc, Monster Phonics, Sounds Right and A Little Wandle were spotlit by 4 of our schools. So if you are looking at your phonics scheme and want to know what else is available, that's the one for you to have a look in at. Again, last year we had a selection of 5 or 6 schools sharing their practice with regard to literacy intervention. We know that it's a hot topic, and that's, you know, the practicalities of what's working in schools on this recorded PL. Again, last year, Kate shared their approach that they use in some parts of the school to look at how to slow down and look at that really rigorous approach to developing rich, emotive sentence construction, particularly for narrative and creative writing, using that slow approach. So the slides and the recording are there to see. Cymfrydor Primary in Torfaen shared their approach to reading, building on their phonics approach. And that's all of the online professional learning that is available from our partner schools over the last year. So something for everyone, depending on what your current priority is in school. So hopefully that's useful. So just before we come to a close this afternoon, but earlier in our last network meeting, if you recall, we had some thoughts and ideas about what you might be doing for World Book Day that might be an extension on from those things, in particular, perhaps trying to think of other ways to engage our learners with the joy of reading that perhaps doesn't necessarily involve wearing a costume. So just a reminder that the resources for World Book Day can be found on the link, and also at the bottom of the slide, the World Book Day link is to all of the activities that were shared from the team and by yourselves. I have been asked to share just this opportunity from the British Council. This information has been put in the Teamspace so you can find out more, but the British Council, in collaboration with the Literacy Trust, are funding opportunities to engage with partner schools in Ukraine, funding for teachers to engage in a programme of planning with schools from Ukraine with a focus on reading and reading engagement. So if that's something that's up your street and you'd like to know a little bit more, then there is further information in the team space in our, went too far, in the network meetings folder for today's meeting, February 26, where our focus was on writing and in particular spelling at the beginning of the session, and any useful resources, including the slides from today and the recording, will be posted in there as soon as I can manage that after the meeting today. And so, a moment to reflect. I'm very grateful to the staff at St Joseph's Roman Catholic Primary School in Blaenau Gwent for sharing their new work on superhero spelling. I'm grateful to Glasluck for sharing some of their resourcing around their spelling in school. I'm particularly grateful to Dawn from Ringland Primary for talking us through the quality journey to writing that they have developed and are continuing to develop in Ringland Primary. And what remains is to ask, if you wouldn't mind, to reflect for a moment on anything that you've taken away from today's session, and to use the QR code on the screen or the link that I've posted in the chat to take a moment to reflect on the session and to provide some feedback. I would encourage you in particular to provide some feedback to those colleagues of ours who've taken the time to prepare and present to share some practice this afternoon. I think that's particularly important.